Hello, my name is Michaela O'Connor Abrams, founder of Mocha Plus. Welcome to our Collective Conscience series. We created this series for you to bring together great minds from around the world on myriad topics that we hope will expand your mind, will challenge your current beliefs, and give you an opportunity to be inspired with every video. Enjoy. Chip, welcome to Collective Conscience. Thank you so much for being here this evening.
Thank you. I mean, Michaela, I just love you. If I was a straight man, I'd marry you. And and as I've already told you, I appreciate the parentheses of your hair. It's shaping your face. Yes, I'm coming to you from Baja, which is where I live most of the time now.
Well, and I have to say, the only thing that would make this whole salon even better is if we were both in Todos Santos and here. And, I want to let everybody know that if all of a sudden Chip starts wandering a little, it's because he literally just came off the beach from having a full massage and a Reiki treatment.
Reiki, like energy treatment.
And now that beautiful fabric that you see behind him is his headboard. So literally we're in bed with Chip Conley. I mean, how much more personal does that?
Listen, if you'd written that as the title for today's talk, you might have had twice as many people. I don't know. Or maybe half as many. I don't know. All I know is the best Wi-Fi in my home is actually in my bed. Thankfully, I do most of my work elsewhere. But if I'm doing a video call, I try to do it from here.
Great. Well, so so many of the people who are joining us this evening know who you are, believe it or not. I know you said earlier, I'm not sure past the West Coast if anybody does, or, make no mistake, people know. But I think that even I have never asked you the question through our many meetings and dinners and opportunities we've had to get together and talk about what you thought as whether it was a young child or a teenager. Did you always know you were going to do something big or several big things in the case of What's Real?
Definitely not. So when I was about 12 or 13 years old, my parents told me, we're going to have to send you to therapy, which I thought meant jail. Partly because I had a lot of imaginary friends. I was very creative. I wasn't very socially adjusted. I was a really good athlete. So I was a premier athlete, but not very good at team sports. And I was playing team sports, basketball, baseball, a few others. And so I think there was an element of me in my adolescence and my teen years where I realized I needed to socialize better. And so I frankly thought I was an oddball. I wish I was wearing my Keep Todos Santos Weird t-shirt right now, as is true in Santa Cruz and Austin and Portland and a few other places. I just sort of thought, keep Chip weird. That was my premise. But my parents wanted me to be anything but weird. And so I will say that I succumbed in my latter adolescence era going into college to doing everything I could to not be weird. And long story short is I went into college, became a hyperachiever, went straight into Stanford Business School from Stanford undergrad, started a company 2.5 years out of business school, Joie de Vivre, my boutique hotel company at age 26. And I will just say that for me, it wasn't so much did I have a big idea and an epiphany and did I want to get it into the world. That has actually over time been my North Star. But back then, I would say at my mid-20s, my process of trying to become successful was trying to be liked, trying to be worthy as a human, trying to have a sense of self-worth that was frankly a lot about being an achievement addict and an admiration addict. So yeah. Now we're plumbing the depths of Chip Conley's brain and psychology. But yeah, that really was it. I don't think that I had some magic dust, that's on, sort of imprinted on me that says, you're going to have all the best ideas in the world. No, I actually, frankly, was trying to become socially acceptable.
And so then what were the people, or was the person, if we want to even talk about mentors, role models,
Hmm.
were they the weird side of Chip, or were they the trying not to be weird side of Chip?
Well, what's funny is that in my 20s, I came out as a gay man at 22 in New York, the summer of 1983. And the next four guys I dated, and I dated women exclusively before that and was almost going to get married to my college sweetheart. And the next four guys I dated were all artists. So there was definitely this artist thing going on. But in terms of my mentor in my early days, I have a lovely story that is just, it has had a profound influence in my life. The company that I most admired when my company Joie de Vivre was growing from its first to its second to its third hotel, ultimately we created 52 boutique hotels, and after Kimpton, we're the second largest boutique hotelier in the United States. So about into my third or fourth hotels, I said the company that I really admire for culture is Southwest Airlines. So I got on the phone and I called Dallas, which is where Southwest headquarters are. And I got a hold of Herb Kelleher's executive assistant, Colleen Barrett. And I said, I would love for Herb to be my mentor. And she laughed just like I did and says, like, Herb doesn't quite have time to have a mentor in San Francisco who's like 30 years old. But if you write Herb with your questions once a year, he'll respond to them. And for the next 10 years, that's what happened. The chairman and founding CEO of Southwest Airlines was my mentor from afar. I never met him. And over the course of those 10 years, he answered all kinds of really beautiful questions for me. And he gave me this sense of generosity. I think hospitality is generosity of spirit from the heart. And he was coming from a place of generosity. He didn't have to respond to me. But every year, I wrote my letter. And it was a letter for a long time until it became an email. But it was for the longest time, most of the time, it was just a letter. And 3 weeks later, I get a letter back from him. The thing that's ironic about all this, two ironies on this. Number one is Colleen Barrett, his executive assistant, who I loved, became president of Southwest Airlines. So the only woman president of a U.S. airline at that time, and for 7 years was president of, and she's an executive assistant, but he totally believed in her. Second thing is January of 2019. January of 2019, I was on the cover of Southwest Airlines for the whole month. So if you're in a Southwest Airlines plane during the month of January, you got to see my ugly mug staring at you from your seat. And it was a really beautiful article that was written about my vision for what a modern elder is and for this academy that we've created. And sadly, a month after I was on the cover, Herb Kelleher died. And so 2 months after I was on the cover, Herb was on the cover, posthumous, however you say that. He was no longer living, but he was on the cover. So 2019 is an important year for me because both Herb and I were on the cover of Southwest Airlines. So
Wow. Well, I'm not surprised from this standpoint at all, even though I truly didn't know what you were going to say there, because the emotional intelligence and that quotient that you have talked about for a very long time in business. I think lots of people give Herb Kelleher that same credit because of the way he treated his people and putting them first, and also always talking about the customer and writing sincere letters, not something that you get on the other airlines. And
right.
It's that emotional intelligence, Chip, that you've talked about in your books, but you have certainly taken it through every single chapter of your career, from building Joie de Vivre resorts and hotels, and to the Airbnb role, and now to Modern Elder Academy. So it's probably a blinding glimpse of the obvious that you find emotional intelligence probably more important than any other piece of what you bring to leadership. Is that fair to say?
I guess so. First of all, speaking of blinding, look at the sun coming in here. Obviously, you're facing west, and normally I would be like a little bit further this way, but wow, that would have been too much. Um, so let's recognize that the most neglected fact in business is that we're all human. Let me say that again. The most neglected fact in business is that we're all human. And whether it's our org charts or our Excel spreadsheets or strategic plans, often the humanity gets lost. And so when I decided to call my company Joie de Vivre, which is a very impractical name for a company, hard to spell, hard to pronounce, most people don't know what it means. It means joy of life in French. Our mission statement and our company name were the same thing. And so one of the things that was really pivotal to me is I read a book by Daniel Goleman, who wrote the book Emotional Intelligence 25 years ago. And what he showed was that 2/3 of the success of organizational leaders is due to their EQ, or emotional intelligence, and only 1/3 is due to the combination of their IQ and the level of experience they have in the job. So what that said to me is like, wow, helping people to understand how to cultivate emotional intelligence is a pretty important topic, not just for leadership development, but just for humanity development. So I believe that corporate, personal development and corporate development are fully linked. And if you create an incubator of a place where people work, where they feel they're personally developing, that they're actually developing as leaders at the same time. So this is why I wrote the book Peak, How Great Companies Get Their Mojo from Maslow, which is about when we first met, Michaela. And I guess, frankly, I feel like there's a term, noblesse oblige. Noblesse oblige is a French term from long ago, which is to the nobility comes the obligation. So I'm a bit of a servant leader mentality, which means that to the leader comes the obligation that you serve your people. And serving your people means you're there to actually help them live up to their full potential. And so the number one question I ask my direct reports, whether it's at Joie de Vivre, Airbnb, or here at Modern Elder Academy, is how can I support you to do the best work of your life here at Modern Elder Academy, for example? And that's a really provocative question that forces both me and them to have a deep conversation about what it means to actually do the best work of their life. And how do they create their own sense of agency to develop the conditions for them to do that kind of work?
The thing that I think happens so often, even in many of the very innovative, progressive startups in the Valley, the bigger they get, somehow the more corporate they get, and the EQ part of it seems to fall away. And that's just, it's not a statistically projectable fact, by the way, but I thankfully have many young people in my life, thanks to Taylor and my godchildren who are at Google and Snapchat and others. And I hear things that don't sound as open or grounded in emotional intelligence and really cultivating their best.
Well, so let me, if I could just scale versus soul. At the end of the day, that is the challenge for a fast growing company. There's a soul that actually was in the early days of a company, and it's part of the reason that it magnetized people to come there, and it's part of the reason people worked for very little money, and it's part of the thing that actually connected people, so they felt they were part of a common purpose. Over time, when scale grows, I'm sorry, when the business grows, soul starts to turn into scale, and it's a dangerous proposition, but there are ways to address it. And I will say that in the almost 7.5 years that I've been involved with Airbnb, 4 years in a full-time role, this whole time as the mentor to Brian Chesky, the co-founder and CEO, it's one of the primary things I've tried to work with him on. And let me say, I'm a mentor. I am both a mentor and an intern. Brian, I was his mentor, but I also reported to him, and I didn't know a damn thing about tech. So I was his intern as well. But I'm really proud of how he's shown up in the last couple of months in terms of
Absolutely.
everything from the process of having to, announce that 25% of their workforce had to be laid off to all 500 contractors of the company got laid off. No one knows about that. That's not been out there in the public. But 500 contractors beyond the 1,900 people who got laid off. But Brian took really thoughtful steps. And so at the end of the day, I guess what I would say is that I'm in a state, I'm turning 60 later this year. I'm in a state in my life where I want to be a legacy to others. It's not about me getting my name in the marquee. It's really about how do I support the 5 or 6 very young CEOs that I support, who have companies that are struggling right now, to help them to be the best that they can be.
Well, let me add to that the press has covered the huge layoffs at Airbnb and used that actually as an example of how to do it, because never have all the people who got laid off been so laudatory of a company, of the heart that went into it, of the resources put behind it, from the job board internally to, I mean, it was really a great model in what is, obviously a perilous time for a company. But to be able to do that and have to do that and still have people loving you and understanding that is rare, and especially at that scale.
Well, let's talk about that. So one of my premises in life right now is that we're living longer, but yet power is moving younger, and the world is changing faster. I'm going to move over to the left, my left here, to get out of the sunlight. So we're living longer, power is moving younger, as evidenced by Airbnb and a bunch of tech companies, and the world's changing faster. And so what I believe is it's time for an intergenerational collaboration like we've never seen before. We have 5 generations in the workplace for the first time. And so I'm a boomer. Brian is a millennial. We had almost like a trade agreement. I traded him some EQ for his DQ, his digital intelligence. And I think that at the end of the day, what I can look at and just say is, we expect these young digital leaders to miraculously embody the emotional intelligence and leadership skills that many of us have had decades to learn. And it's really hard to microwave your emotional intelligence or leadership skills. So what we need to start doing is creating a means for younger and older people to learn from each other. And for these young tech leaders, I mean, I can count on a couple hands, all the Travis Kalanick's and the Adam Newmans and oh my gosh, Elizabeth Holmes, these young leaders whose companies grew way faster than their skills did. And they did not have a modern elder, so to speak, by their side. And so I actually think this is the future, and it's a really early stage of the future, but I think we're going to see a lot more of brilliant young technologists connecting with someone with some age who's there to be, frankly, in the background, supporting them and helping them to make good decisions.
Yeah. Well, my hope here is that more people, reach out to others like Brian did to you. And when I remember when this happened, you're like, wait a minute, I don't know tech and that, but he knew, right? He understood that there was going to be this need to have a wisdom that you don't get overnight, that does come with age. And I guess, the movement you just said, I mean, we're at the early stages of this. So I want to.
It takes humility though, Michaela. I mean, on both sides, for Brian, he had to have the humility that he was bringing in to his company, someone to be his mentor and who's going to report to him. I'm, 21 years older than Brian, but the guy who's reporting to him is also his mentor. And I had been CEO of my own company for 24 years. You better have humility and personal confidence, because otherwise you're not going to invite that guy, Chip, in. Similarly, I had to have the humility of knowing I'm not CEO anymore. I'm no longer the sage on the stage. I'm the guide on the side. And I am, my role here is not to get my name in the headlights or in the marquee, but it's to actually support these three young founders, and also right size my ego about what does it mean to actually serve other people as opposed to serve my ego as the CEO of a company that I'd started. So these are not things that people do easily, naturally, etc. But if you actually want to be, if you want to be relevant, in your later career years, you better learn how to actually move out of the self-absorption and into, as Carl Jung, the psychologist, said, the first half of your life the operating system is your ego, your primary operating system. The second half of your life, your primary operating system is your soul. And that shift, which happens in midlife, often around 45, 50, early 50s, is a shift that we as a culture, as a society, have very little rituals or rites of passage or education around. So I had to learn on my own because there was no book for me to read.
Right. And as incredible an institution as Stanford is, I'm guessing there wasn't a whole lot of that in your curriculum.
No. Well, let's recognize I graduated from Stanford Business School in 1984, so that was a long time ago. No, it's not even just Stanford doesn't. None of the business schools are great business schools, but they don't focus on intergenerational collaboration. They're usually focused on the past, not the future. And so I would just say that the thing that's interesting to me is the idea that, demographics are quite predictable. You sort of know what the age wave is going to be, because it doesn't just pop up out of nowhere. But very few people have focused on this longevity revolution that's happening right now. With they say today that if you were born 2 years ago in 2018, there's more than a 50% chance, if you live in the Western world, that you will actually live to 100 or longer. We have not remade our world based upon a premise where the average person lives to 100.
Right.
And so that's a huge subject into itself. I'll leave it at that. But this is part of the reason I actually think that lifelong learning, which is a term that's about 30 years old, it shouldn't be retired. It's fine. Lifelong learning makes sense. You graduate, you go and learn for a lifetime. But the term that we're really interested in is long life learning, not lifelong learning, long life learning, which basically means how do you live a life that is as deep as it is long? Because yes, we're going to live a long time, but if you can't afford to live a long time, or if you actually haven't created the depth of understanding yourself, or you haven't made that shift from ego to soul, or you don't understand what generativity means, these are things that we need to learn. Just like, we helped people in their teens go to adolescence, go to junior high school and high school to learn how to become a young adult. What we need to do for people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s is teach them how to be a young elder, not elderly, but elder, which is the premise that an elder is just someone who's older than the people who surround them. It's not just the last 5 years of your life, which is what an elderly person is.
Well, and that, as one who already had the birthday that you're about to have, I want to use that as the chance to pivot a little bit about you being a natural disruptor, right? I think one of the quotes, and I shared this with you, that I was kind of not taken aback, but I paused a little on, was when you said that in general, you're really not much into etiquette, and that you're a rule breaker and a rebel by nature. And yet I know you to be one of the kindest human beings I've met. So the rule breaking and not much into etiquette. I mean, are those the key ingredients to being the disruptor?
So for me, I wish my mom was on the call right now, because she would completely agree that I'm not very good at rules or etiquette. because they're formality, and I'm not good at formality. Formality is just not my thing. Um, and so, what is my thing is um, listening and trying to really understand the voice inside of me, because I spent a lot of my younger years not listening to that. I was very externally focused, trying to make sure everybody liked me. And so the process of listening to the voice inside of you and learning how to develop an intuition, to me, intuition and wisdom have a lot in common. They're very much about pattern recognition. How do you recognize the patterns in your life or in the world that allow you to be wiser? And so for me, whether yes, I was a very early disruptor of the hotel industry as one of the first boutique hoteliers after Ian Schrager and Bill Kempton. Pretty much I was the next. And then, yeah, 7.5 years ago, when the hotel industry didn't even know what Airbnb was, I joined Airbnb 70 hours a week as the head of global hospitality and strategy and Brian's mentor. And everybody in the hotel business looked at me like, "You're an idiot. That idea is going nowhere." And about a year or two later, I started getting a lot of resumes from hotel managers. um, so the thing that I had to do in both of those cases is trust something instinctually inside of me, that said, "Here's the ingredients for why this idea is going to go big." And yeah, then I have to talk with other people about it. Um, and then I do. But it is an oxymoron to say you're a disruptive hospitality leader, because disruption and hospitality sound like they're not necessarily in the same paragraph. But I guess what it really means is, I'm open to trying new things. And yes, the rebel, it's interesting. If you take the word rebel, which is my first book was called The Rebel Rules, Daring to Be Yourself in Business. If you take the word rebel and then you look at how it morphs into elder, all it is, it's the same 5 letters, except for B turns into D. It just shifts the opposite. So someone just sent me a GIF, which, if you're not into the GIF world, it's a graphic animation that actually shows rebel turning into elder. And
Love it.
so I guess I'm a rebel elder.
Okay. Well, so let's take that intuition. That when was that first spark of the intuition toward the end of the Airbnb years,
Mm-hmm.
right? That you said, wait, there's something that hasn't been done and I have to do this. And that's the whole what I'll call the modern elder movement. That is the Modern Elder Academy and your book, Wisdom at Work. I mean, so what was the intuition there? What sparked that to really make you want to just,
What sparked it was when I started writing the book Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder. I was interviewing 150 people in midlife, which at that time I defined as 45 to 65. Today I define it as 35 to 75. I think midlife is a marathon, 40 years long. And what I noticed over and over again was how bewildered and irrelevant people felt. Including at Airbnb, I saw people who were a 53-year-old software engineer who just felt so over the hill. And so I came back to that question of like, wow, if we're living longer, but power's moving younger and the world's changing faster, how are we creating like a midlife wisdom school, a school dedicated to providing instruction and the social crucible of safety where people are sharing wisdom with each other? Because wisdom is not taught, it's shared. How are we providing that in a place where people can do a midlife pit stop and press the reset button and say, I know I'm going through some major transitions in my life right now. I need to actually have space to think about what's next. And so that idea came from a run on the beach here in Pescadero, El Pescadero in Baja, where I had a home on the beach. And I came back with an epiphany, and it's like, okay, well, I've been on the board of the Esalen Institute for a decade, and I've taught there, and I have a hospitality background, and I have a new point of view and a curriculum that's quite specific to how do you navigate your midlife transitions. And that's how 2.5 years ago, we started the beta program for MEA. And MEA has now had 750 graduates from 24 countries. It's a social enterprise. So, over 50% of the people have been on some form of scholarship. So it's meant to be socioeconomically diverse. And it's my next calling. You can have a job, a career, or a calling in your life. And I choose as much as I can to try to find the calling. And this feels like the calling for now.
So share with us a snapshot of what happens when one
Yeah.
arrives at Modern Elder Academy.
So the cohorts, so obviously we're closed right now. We reopen in October. Our new academic calendar and applications will be open for people in early July. Although actually you can go on the Modern Elder Academy website and see a PDF of what's on the calendar for next year now. You just can't apply yet. So a person arrives on a Sunday and leave on a Sunday. There's 18 people in a cohort, usually approximately. And the whole premise is we take people through the process of where they are in terms of their own sense, their mindset around aging, and their ability to evolve. One of the things that most of us don't realize is that the first half of life is about accumulating relationships, job titles, knowledge, sometimes marriages, children, stuff. We accumulate stuff. And the second half of life is about editing. It's about learning what is most essential. So I believe a modern elder is as curious as they are wise. Curiosity opens up possibility. Wisdom distills down what's important. And so one of the things most of us need, but no one has ever coined or thought of, is how do I create the great midlife edit? And that's part of what we do every week is with our people who come as our students. We call them our compadres. They come and do a great midlife edit, and they evolve into what's next for them. And they start learning things. They start learning how to collaborate. They start actually opening up to what is their mastery. And we use nature. The part that's amazing about being in a very rural beachfront part of Mexico is we use the desert, we use the beach, we use tropical, we use all of that as teachers for people to actually understand what it is that they need to do and how they create their reset. And the cohorts are so powerfully connected that when they graduate a week later, there's a cohort that started in April of 2018. They've had over 100 Zoom calls now every week for over 2 years. And they have that level of connection with each other. So I actually think part of what people need in midlife and later is purpose, wellness, and community. And that comes from Stanford's program. Dr. Phil Pizzo created it, the Distinguished Careers Institute. So purpose, wellness, and community is often what we lose when we start to wind down our career. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a longer story, and I'm writing a white paper that will come out in the next month, called The Emergence of Lifelong Learning, How Midlife Evolved from a Crisis to a Calling. So I'm a bit of a geek, and but I think it's important because, last thought on this, sorry, I'm going long, Michaela, is there are 3 life stages that actually were discovered in the 20th century. Adolescence existed before the word adolescence existed. Adolescence as a word was in 1904. But prior to adolescence, the word coming about, people thought of you as an adult when you hit puberty. So you worked in the mines, or you got married and you had babies when you were 15. And so there was not a sense that adulthood was 18. And so we gave a ton of public policy support, government money. Junior high schools and high schools in the United States basically got created after adolescence was discovered. And then retirement was discovered in the 1930s because, frankly, we're trying to get the old people out of the workforce when there was a high unemployment rate. There was a need for Social Security, pensions, etc. The other life stage that actually got discovered in the 20th century was midlife. 1965, Elliot Jakes, a Canadian psychotherapist, actually coined the term midlife crisis. All midlife has gotten in the last 100 years is a bad brand. and my belief is whereas adolescence and retirement have gotten an enormous amount of attention, it is time for us to give midlife, defined as 35 to 75, the kind of due attention it deserves as well. And so I would love to see midlife wisdom schools just propping up or populating themselves around the world. Just as Esalen, when Esalen and Big Sur opened in 1962, within 13 years, there were 100 personal growth retreat centers around the US. So I hope that that will be the same. I don't want to create all of them. I just want to be a catalyst for social entrepreneurs and for-profit entrepreneurs to create their own version of it.
Yeah. Well, I love that you've put, I mean, you could have done this program without doing this gorgeous property, right? Without making this oasis in Todos Santos, this magical place, because as we know, place and environment so inform the way we feel, right? Our own emotions around whatever it is that we're discussing and focusing. So I think that hopefully your plan on this being a replicable model and moving that around the world too, because I think there's a lot to that. And every time I see more of the pictures or somebody else's pictures and the stories, it's really exceptional. So
thank you.
Congratulations on that. And to that end, I'll ask you one more question, and then we have a lot of questions, I think, coming.
Yes.
And that is, and since you're so prescient and so good at disrupting, so here we will be in 2030. Hopefully I will actually be in Todos Santos, and who knows, with my own oasis. 10 years, right? What will you have done? What do you think will happen? What are the things you will create?
You know, if my legacy is to help cultivate and harvest wisdom for people of all ages, I think I will have served well on this planet. You know, knowledge and wisdom are two different things. When I joined Airbnb, Brian said to me about 3 weeks into it, he said, "Chip, we hired you for your knowledge, but what we really got was your wisdom." And I had no idea what he was talking about because I never thought about the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Jimi Hendrix, the great musician, said, "Knowledge speaks and wisdom listens." And of course, I'm on this call with you, so I'm not listening a lot. I'm doing a lot of talking. But I think helping people to understand, how do you cultivate wisdom? And when I was 26 and I started Joie de Vivre, I created a wisdom book. This is an absolutely true story. I can show you my series of wisdom books. And every weekend, not every weekend, but in the early days, every weekend, but you know, it came and went. When I was going through difficult times, every weekend, I would make a set of bullet points. This was not a diary or a journal. It was an opportunity for me to metabolize what I'd learned that week. And it was a set of bullet points, 3, 4, 5 bullet points that helped me to understand, wow, I got my ass kicked this week. What did I learn? And I have been doing that for 34 years. And what I can say is that when I went through when I went through Great Recession, I went back to my .com, you know, wisdom books and said, I must have learned something during the .com bust 9/11. And so I think if I can be, what I'd like to say in 2030 is that I have helped to create a world where we're no longer focused on the knowledge worker, which is a term that comes from 1959 from Peter Drucker, the management theorist. And we're more focused on the wisdom worker, because the world is awash in knowledge. I've got all the knowledge of the world on my iPhone, but what I don't have is wisdom. And wisdom is something that, as I said, is shared, not taught. And it's something that actually, frankly, you cultivate over time. And just because someone's 75 doesn't mean they're wiser than someone who's 35. If you're someone who's cultivated your wisdom at 35, you can far out exceed someone at 75.
Wonderful. Okay, well, as we talked about this before everybody came in from the waiting room, we could go on for hours because I have so many more questions, but I see that, Shelley, we have a number of people who have gone into the chat room. So would you like to call on somebody and unmute them?
Certainly, I actually have some questions in the chat that I can start with. No hands raised yet. So thank you, Chip. Shonda asks, 35 seems too young to make the switch from acquisition to editing. Can you talk some more about that?
Well, I thought the same thing, Shonda. I mean, to be honest with you, when we first did our beta, we said people had to be 45 to 65. And then what we found is we had people, 25% of the people who wanted to come were on either side of 65 or 45, older than 65 or younger than 45. We have an application process, so we don't let everybody in. So it's a process of like, you have to go through applications. So we have to make sure that someone's right for it. But what I'll say is that with the 8% or so of our alums who are in their 30s, many of them have accelerated. Let me tell you a story about Justin Michael Williams, a gay African-American man who lives in LA, very successful. He became uber successful, had a huge Instagram following. And at age 30, he felt old and felt like he didn't want to live this way anymore. He came here a year and a half ago, December 2018, and to try to actually figure out, how do you shed the identity that you no longer want? So in many ways, like, the Great Midlife Edit is not just about like, okay, what's my new career? It's actually looking at the identities that have defined you. And how do you actually let go of those? Because frankly, if you're, the difference between change and transition is when you do change, you get divorced and then you get married to another guy or woman who's just like the old one. That's change. Transition is when you actually make internal changes that actually force major evolution in who you are. And so what Justin learned was at age 30, he reminds me a lot of me. He was so obsessed by being publicly acclaimed, and he was very successful, a great singer, that he just sort of realized that he had no internal life anymore. And yet when he was a kid, he had an internal life. So he really wanted to shed his addiction to Instagram and to that sort of social media world. So is that an unqualified person for the MEA? No. I mean, at age 30, he's our youngest person we've ever had. We've had people from 30 to 88. Our average age is 54. No, he needed to do a midlife edit, and he needed to evolve out of what he was in and learn about what's next and figure out how to collaborate and counsel, which are the 4 steps of the program. So I don't want to judge someone. You know, if someone's gone through a bunch of transitions and they're 35 years old, if you're a software engineer in Silicon Valley at 35, you feel like you're 65.
Yep. Okay, next, Shelley.
Okay, from Julie. Thank you for all your generous insights. A question. The last couple of weeks have led to much reckoning and introspection about institutionalized racism, especially for many white leaders. I'm curious what questions you've been asking yourself, what assumptions you've questioned, and or how you might be thinking differently about your own leadership at Modern Elder Academy in the context of the current moment.
Sure, thank you. I appreciate that question. Let's make sure that question is asked 2, 4, and 6 months from now again, because the thing I'm going to be saying in the future is we all went to the same university. Where were you? Where were you means like, okay, like this has been an ongoing problem for a long time. Where were you? Where were we along the way? So this is a very personal subject for me. I went to high school in the inner city in LA at Snoop Dogg's high school. So the Bloods and the Crips, that was my high school. Long Beach Poly, it's the #1 feeder school for NFL and NBA athletes. So I grew up in a very culturally curious place. I have a foster son who's African-American, who's an adult now. So I have 3 African-American children, grandchildren, and I was in an 8-year relationship with an African-American man. So I get racism, because I get that when I walked into a store and my partner of not many years ago, Donald, as an African-American doctor, no less, walked in the store, the security person followed Donald when he was walking through the store. No one followed me. So this is so baked into our society. I don't know if anybody's seen, because a lot of the people here in the Bay Area Have you seen the video in the last day or two from Lisa, what's her last name? From La Face? I think it's called La Face. It's a skincare company. And she basically confronts a guy, a darker skinned guy, who turns out to be Filipino, but he looks African American. He had just penned with not a crayon, but a chalk. He had put Black Lives Matter on the front of a building in the Pacific Heights, a building he lives in. And she said, she didn't say, how dare you, but basically it's all on video. She basically said, listen, what the hell are you doing? And we have such unconscious biases as well as unconscious privileges. The bias side we've heard a lot about, and a lot of white people don't like to hear about that. But the unconscious privilege is a term I want to actually introduce tonight, which is the idea that you don't even know the privilege you have. When I go into a store, I don't have anybody following me. So how does all this relate to MEA and my life, et cetera? Well, 25% of the people, 750 people who've come to MEA are people of color. Part of the reason we have a very generous scholarship program is to allow people of all types to come here. Because, frankly, if you're a wealthy person, you've got, life coaches and cash and all kinds of things. But if you're a 62-year-old social worker who has $20,000 in the bank and thinks she's going to have to work for the next 20 years, you need what we have to offer. So, and frankly, the retired investment banker who you're going to go walk down the beach with each morning, you're going to learn from each other. So we are very dedicated to creating socioeconomic diversity, including in our faculty in terms of the people who teach here. What I'll just say is that I think that the thing that frustrates me is this has come up before. It's sort of like gun rights. It's come up before, there's a bunch of energy around it, and then it doesn't change. Gun rights has not. And the NRA has been against making that change. The good news on this one is I don't see a singular population or company or organization that is here to stop the shifts that need to happen around systemic racism. But thank you for the question. It's a very important one to me.
Shelley.
Okay, and from Liz, Chip, with the events of the last 4 months and that we are still in the midst, has anything changed in how you think about MEA in terms of content and what's important?
Thank you, Liz. It's good to hear from you. Good to see you. Liz is an MEA alum, actually, I think she was in the beta period. Yeah, she was in the beta period for sure. So that would have been over 2 years ago. Well, I think a couple thoughts. Number one is intergenerational collaboration has become a bigger and bigger piece of the program, and just the process of helping people human themselves. We call it humaning. One of the things that's true in our 30s and 40s is we're in the rush hour of life. The rush hour of life means we're trying to do too many things. And that's partly because of the accumulating era we're in. So we're just like running around with our head cut off, doing too many things, and we lose some of our humanity in that process. So part of what we help to do here is to really integrate the process of learning how to become human again. But to be quite specific, Liz, one of the things we're looking at is creating an MEA online program to the public. Because while we are scheduled to open in October, and I think we will, because our programs are small, so we can do social distancing if we need to. We have it planned for this fall that everybody's gonna have to get their own room, so no one has to share a room. But what we know is there's a lot of people who, for time, money reasons, or safety reasons, they don't want to make the trek. So the idea of how do you take a program that is all about transformation and turn it into a web-based program? Not an easy thing to do. It's like saying, Burning Man, how do you take Burning Man and make it online? It's not easy. And as a board member of Burning Man for 10 years, I know what they're struggling with right now. So what I'm excited about is that we have, I think, a platform that is going to provide dyad-based learning with psychometrics that allows you to see how is your adaptability, your resilience, your positive perspective on your aging, all improving over the course of a 9-week program. We'll be probably launching that in the fall so that we can actually have a bigger impact on more people.
Could we possibly have all the political candidates go through that first?
Yeah, that would be wise.
It certainly would, because wisdom, well, I won't go there.
Yeah.
We have one more question that we have time for today. Shelley, we can hear you.
There's some people who like the sound of that. We have no more questions in the chat, and no one has raised their hand.
And no more raised hands. Okay.
Well, wait, hold on. We have one more.
Okay.
Just came in. Just in. From Michelle, you admire Southwest culture. Any that stand out to you today?
Any cultures that stand out to me today?
Yeah.
I mean, I listen. I appreciate Airbnb as a worker culture. I don't think there's let me just say, just like there's no perfect personality, a personality is an extension of who you are as a human, as an individual. A culture is an extension of what a company is. So Harley Davidson years ago had a really robust culture, not so much anymore. And it was so different than, say, Facebook's culture more recently, which is a very different culture than Oracle, than Apple. So for me to understand what's a great culture is to see the results of what come out of that culture. I think that for the reason I think Airbnb had a great culture, Uber did not. And Uber did not invest in their culture, and it did not have a CEO who cared about culture. I'm talking about Travis. So long story short is, culture is sustainable. You know, we talk about sustainability from an eco perspective, but when it comes to a corporate environment, a culture is something that sustains itself if you invest in it. And so I'll leave it at that. I mean, of course, I love Patagonia and a few other companies that have stayed true to their culture for very many years. But at the end of the day, the cultures I'm most interested in today are small companies and how they're investing in the culture in the early days.
Okay. Well, again, we could go on for at least another hour or two. And since you're in bed already anyway, I mean,
I also have to go to the bathroom.
You maybe excuse that. But so much for your time. I'll be knocking on your door literally and figuratively after this to talk about coming back to us in a few months.
Would love that.
To evolve and to have your insights, because it's really wonderful. So thank you everybody for joining us tonight. I wish you a great week and hope that you have gleaned a lot from this evening. Thank you so much. Thank you again.
I want to say hi to John, and I want to say hi to Zahed, and I want to say hi to Nancy and to Liz and to Karen and to Scott and to all those people out there. Thank you so much for all your support.
I think you know them all, pretty sure.
Well, a lot of them. And the mom. I don't know who you are, the mom, but I just want to say hi, Mom. All right.
Nice to see you, Chip.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.